Tammy, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me this evening. I'm really excited to have you on the show and learn from you today. We're going to talk about relationships, which are always hard, like many layers. And I think we're all figuring it out in our individual relationships. But often we tend to ask for too much, I think, from relationships as well without looking inward. And that's something I've had to realize on my personal journey. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. But before we go down all of that, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and what's brought you here today.
Yeah. So I am Tammy Cox. I am a trauma specialist. I help women either find love, find lasting love, or heal their marriage by healing the wounds caused by childhood trauma. And so many of us healers, I came into my work because I was so fucked up. I was just a mess. When I became a wife and then soon after a mother, what I recognized was all my triggers and traumas coming to the surface, bubbling up within me, and I just was not okay. Like I was wigging out. And this is really what sort of led me on my journey. It was like the first boom. It was the first realization that I was not going to be okay if I didn't change some really big things in my life.
Mhm.
So yeah, wherever you want to go from there, I could talk
And
about my childhood
yeah.
or wherever you want to go.
Yeah, I think just to understand more contextually, what was causing the trauma to come up in relationship, right? So I think most people can connect with this fact that, yes, I do get triggered by my partner. I get triggered as a parent, but there's a lot of stuff that's coming up and I don't know why.
Yeah. It's so important. Like I had to realize for myself, it's so important to know that those first 5 years of our life create our entire personality.
Yeah.
Now, most people don't realize it. And it's not until adulthood that we actually realize it when we start getting into our own families. We go from our family of origin to creating a family for ourselves. And what we don't realize is those patterns that were created in the first 5 years, that's when we start to see them really, really magnify is when we start a family. And for me, I just when I held my baby in my hands, my firstborn in my hands for the first time, and I looked in her pure little eyes, my first thought was, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to mess her up like I was messed up." And then for the weeks after, just feeling this heaviness, this responsibility of how am I going to keep that pattern from this perfect little baby? And then just over the years, seeing my patterns roll in, coming from very controlled upbringing. I had an abusive father who was very much slammed us into this box. This is who you will be. You're not allowed to be anything but this. And so when I saw me being like that, I was like, oh, hell no. So there's just so many layers to it. But I really had to see that if I was going to change the pattern, I was going to have to do some massive rewiring of my brain.
Mhm.
And that was when the heaviness hit me. But I think I saw my trauma wounds coming up. I definitely had them all through my teenage years,
Mhm.
my early 20s, but it was when they became so unavoidable was when I started to create a family for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's something really important you touched on because as children, if those relationships we have with our caregivers, especially our parents, if those are fractured at any point, we're continuously seeking that attachment, but in the wrong ways, right? So we'll be asking for love, but we will be asking for it in the most unloving ways. And when you were able to, like you said, pinpoint what was going on and those patterns and start making those shifts, what have you noticed has changed for you personally?
Oh gosh, everything. In who I be, how I show up. So when I would get triggered, or when I still do, because let's be honest, I still do. When I get triggered, first of all, I'm much more aware of it so I can notice faster. And I really show up as it's like having a tantrum. It is like a 2-year-old, 4-year-old girl within me having a tantrum
Mhm.
as a 42-year-old woman. It just looks ridiculous as I see it now, but it is that little girl within me, just a meltdown. But I'm much more aware of it. So when I have the meltdown, first of all, I talk to my husband about how he can deal with this
Mhm.
tantrum of this little tiny girl, how he can here she is, she's crying out for something and she doesn't know how to communicate it. And so this is what it looks like, but I can get a hold of her really fast.
Mhm.
I have a very good relationship with her now, so I can calm her down much quickly. But the triggers, as far as I know, I've been on my healing journey a long time, and as far as I know, they don't go away
Yeah.
completely, but they do minimize. They get shorter,
Mhm.
they're less frequent, these things, but we also have less shame around them because
Mhm.
for one, we realize everyone has them. Listen here, every single person has them. They look different, they act different, they think different, but everyone has them.
Mhm.
And if we could just get close and intimate, especially the people really close in our life, our spouse, our kids, if we could get very intimate with the little child within them, we can really work on nurturing those wounds that we all have. Because you said if we have unmet needs in childhood, I believe almost all of us do.
Mhm.
To what extent, it's different,
Right.
but we almost always do. And it's just about saying, okay, no human being is perfect. We all have gaps. Like I tell my kids, I know I effed you up. I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
It wasn't on purpose. I just did the best I could with what I had. But it's about recognizing that we all have gaps and we get to be the one to fill the gaps for our little selves within
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. I'm so glad you brought up shame because that was going to be my next question. But around shame, what I wanted to ask, and it sounds like you're doing it already, is having that compassion for yourself and acceptance that this is okay. It's going to happen. And it's really interesting that you also shared that you've brought your husband into it. And I think it's so important to have those intentional and meaningful and honest conversations, which require vulnerability to be able to say, hey, this is something I'm struggling with for these reasons, and I'm working through it, but let's work on this together as well when you see it. How has that been received? And I'm sure your husband's maybe had similar conversations with you. So how have you guys been able to put these things on the table and work through it? Because that's going to probably feed into the work you do with other women as well, right?
Yeah, it's the pieces like vulnerability.
Mm.
If I come to you and I open up about like my deepest hurts, it can't not bring compassion, right? So when I bring my pain to my husband and say, listen, I know I have some of these things that have actually really hurt you, and I'm so sorry about it. It is these deep wounds within me. He just meets me with compassion. Anyone that loves you will. And that's a good way to, if you're in a relationship with someone and you're at the beginning, or maybe you're even far in, if you bring your wounds to that person and they use those wounds against you versus holding them with compassion, that is a good sign that you're in a toxic relationship.
Hmm.
Anyone that loves you who is healing as well on their healing path, because no one's healed.
Yeah.
We're, if we're alive, we are not all the way healed,
Right.
folks. But if they're on their journey, they're somewhere on their journey, they're going to maybe at first they might feel prickly because possibly they don't know how to receive it. As a man, men are a lot less emotional.
Mm.
So they oftentimes, you guys don't often see emotions the same way we
Hmm.
do as women. But if you could just be open and hear, that's all the woman really wants. She knows you're not going to feel exactly like she does, but she wants to feel seen and heard and felt. And that's it. So I've noticed what works for me and what has also allowed my husband to open up to me was just me being vulnerable
Mm.
and authentic and real and saying, hey, this is all my stuff. All my
Yeah.
cards are out on the table. I'm not going to hide them from you. I'm not going to pretend like they're not there. I'm just going to be raw.
Mm,
And I think that's the only way we can be if we want this sort of healthy, beautiful, healing
mhm.
relationship
Yes.
that is for our best and for the best for the world as well.
Yeah.
Because I will tell you, romantic relationships are not here to make you happy.
Right.
I hate to tell you that, but they can, if you go into it thinking that they're here to make you happy, you are going to be so disappointed
Mm,
because the romantic relationships, I believe, are created to grow us.
yes.
They are, mine is my greatest spiritual teacher. They're not here to make you
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think people have that misconception at times, and I've said this before too. You can create happy memories together, but they're not going to come and make you happy. So that's a choice you have to make in your own way.
Beautifully said.
And basically, you have to find that happiness within you to be able to then share that with your partner who likely should be doing the same. So then you guys can come together. Now, you touched on something important because that can be a source of friction between men and women. And I often encounter that myself in my marriage too, is if the woman is being emotional, it's easy to get lost in, okay, this doesn't make sense to me, right? Logically, I can't understand this. And it does require a lot of work and healing as well as a man to be able to have space for that and be like, okay, doesn't have to make sense. What matters is what this person is feeling and how can I hold space for that, like I would hold space for my client. So,
Or your child, right?
yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, how does that conversation then take place? Because sometimes even for the woman, it could be like, I don't know why I'm feeling this, but this is how I feel. And I can't change that. So, how do you make that conversation very intentional without either side taking it personally or making it about something else rather
Yeah.
than focusing on this person is feeling something, hold space.
What's really helped me is working with my own clients, right? Because as healers, we have to practice neutrality.
Mhm.
Nothing is intrinsically right or wrong. These are all just perceptions based on a belief system, right? So we have to look through neutral eyes. Just because that little girl within me is acting a certain way, I know rationally my 42-year-old side is saying, "What the heck?"
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter because the 2-year-old's in charge right now. So it's really about, I think, incorporating all the different parts of you
Mm.
and being able to be, again, authentic and real with your partner and say, "Listen, I know this is completely irrational." So, for instance, women have to really, I think, get very intimate with their cycle because we are 4 different people within a month.
Mm.
Men get a drop of testosterone every 15 minutes. Women get 4 different hormones on specific days of our cycle. So we are so completely different just in the hormones
Mm.
part. We by knowing, so I know the week before my period, I know that's when all of my emotions are coming to the surface. He knows, my husband knows. He knows what week it is, and I'll remind him as it approaches so that he can prepare himself.
Mm.
Because us women, we're natural empaths. We take on the pain of others and we alchemize it.
Mm.
That is the beauty of who we are. Men are not that.
Mm.
So we have to understand the roles of both the men and women. We have to understand the goddess and the god within them and how we co-create together to create this beautiful synergy. If we can learn this thing, we could be extremely powerful together. So the man, if he could see her emotions in a neutral state of, like you would your clients, of just, she's feeling these things. They don't come from me. These have nothing to do with me.
Right.
And I've told my husband this, these emotions coming out of me, they have nothing to do with you. This is the pain from either the world, this is the pain coming in from all these areas, possibly from my younger self, but they literally have nothing to do with you. So by telling him this, first of all, he's off the hook, right? He's, oh, okay, it's not about me. I could just sit here and listen. Cool.
Right.
And then I tell him what I would like from him. Babe, I don't need you to fix anything. I just want to be. Sometimes I say, I know I don't act lovable in these moments, but if you just hug me, like, I'll calm down. And so he's learned over the years. We've been together 18 and a half years. So we've learned these things over time. But this is really a thing of being intimate with yourself as the woman, to know what you need, to know, okay, this is my pain week. This is my shark week. This is when I'm going to be experiencing this. How can I prepare him for that? And be compassionate to the fact that he does not feel like you. He does not have those emotions. And God bless him if he's willing to stand in the space and hold you while you literally die, because it feels like that week feels like death to a woman. Because we cycle with the moon. So it's really about the awareness on both sides. And I can applaud any man who is on his healing journey and he has taken on this huge task of attempting to not understand a woman, because I don't think you ever will, but hold space for her journey.
Yeah,
It's
I
really
appreciate
beautiful.
that, because what I'm hearing from you also is it's both individuals need to do their inner healing and work, because if I'm grounded and my wife is having her emotions come up, I can separate myself from that. But if I'm not grounded, if I'm taking on stress or if I've got other stuff going on, it's easy for me to get hooked into that and make it about me or take it personally. And then things fall off the rails there. So it's important for both people to have that awareness. Now, the other piece you're talking about from a biological standpoint, because we often dismiss it and we'll make jokes about it that, oh, she's being crazy right now, or you're having that week. But when you look at it biologically, and to your point, if you're working with your partner in a compassionate way, then you can work at it together rather than saying, okay, you're just being crazy and I don't have to deal with this, or joke about it, right? Because it's not a joke based on what you're sharing as well, right? There's a lot going on inside and hormonally too. Do you think that would help if men are able to look at it from a different lens rather than feeling like it's just, sometimes people even say women are using it as an excuse to excuse their behavior.
Yeah, I can understand that, because if you're not on your healing journey and she's not aware of it, it can feel very explosive. Just when you start on your healing journey, it's really about taking radical responsibility. And yet, when you get to that week, there are times, I will tell you, it feels like you're not in control, right? It can feel that way. Being an emotional master, it takes so much awareness. It takes constant awareness and constant focus to be able to navigate through your emotions and realize that you aren't those emotions, but those emotions are teachers. Every emotion is so very powerful. But if you won't look at the message it's giving you, then what's the point? You got to look at the message it's giving you. But for men to think of a woman as she's making an excuse, it's not like that, because the woman is literally taking on, I believe, in a lot of ways, taking on some of his pain, because what he refuses to emote gets stuck in his body. Emotions are just energy in motion, right? Once they're emoted, they're out of the body. But what do men do? Choke it down and sit with the pain. And that's why they have more stiffness in the body. That's why they live shorter lives, because they don't emote all their emotions. And I think that's changing as men are coming onto their healing path. They're connecting more to their emotions. But I believe in a lot of ways, When you're in a partnership, she's emoting for you.
Mm.
She is a gift. And that's why you're drawn to that woman, is because she's literally your polar opposite, energetically speaking. You're drawn to that. But if you're judging her emotions, you're not helping her.
Mhm.
You got to see them as a tool. You got to see them as a teacher. But if you judge those emotions, you're going to make it worse on her and you.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing from you again is having that level of understanding
Yeah.
for each other. Now, you've talked about the work you do, and I am curious because you said you're working either with women in relationships or who are about to begin relationships. So, is there a difference in terms of the focus? Because I would assume if you're going into a relationship, it's really important to have some of that work already done or be aware of your traumas. Now, you can still do that while you're in a relationship, but there's other stuff that may be coming up that may need to be dealt with as well. What's the difference from your?
Ideally, it's best if you, like you said, get the work done before.
Mhm.
Because you're setting we all, like, going back to the patterns, we all have the patterns. So who do you normally show up within your relationship? Your mom or your dad?
Mhm.
Who are you in that dynamic? And then what are you attracting? So ideally, to have her before a significant relationship is good, but oftentimes these women have a couple of divorces underneath their belt, a lot of rough roller coaster like stuff, which I love. I wake up in the morning for this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. The messier, the better for me. But so it's not like it's easier to find the relationship. Oftentimes, the longer you've been at this, meaning you get to midlife and you're like, hey, what's going on here? It's the same work. Essentially, it is the same exact work. Let's look at your patterns. Oh, here's your pattern. Okay. Let's find the culprit. So, the two things I'm looking for in my sessions with my clients is, one, we get to go back to the traumatic event that created the belief.
Mhm.
We get to find the belief, and then we get to remove all the emotions in order to neutralize that event. So once we find the belief, it's like that aha moment of, oh, no wonder I have sabotaged all my relationships. I believe I'm unlovable to the core of my being.
Yeah. Now, what you're sharing there, especially if someone's gone through a divorce or they've been in previous relationships, that's more information they have that they can use. Right. Now, on the flip side, someone could say, I've been in relationships or I haven't been in relationships. I don't know what the trauma is or what are these patterns. So then how does one identify it unless they go into a relationship?
Because we don't use their conscious mind. We use their, I do subconscious mind work. So my job is to get their logical mind out of the way. I don't want them to tell me with their mouth what the pattern is. I go in and I find the belief in this, using the subconscious. Some would say it's like a form of hypnosis, right?
Mhm.
I don't put anyone in like a deep trance, but I have to get them relaxed enough to get the logical mind out of the way.
Yeah. And I think it is, I see that quite a bit in therapeutic work as well, where just through talk therapy or deeper exploration, you can bring awareness to certain things. So, to your point, you can help through relaxation or just building that therapeutic alliance. Then people are a bit more open to talk about things. And then you can help them make some of those connections on this.
Actually, what I do is, so we hold these emotions in our body, right? So what I have them do is we connect to the emotion through the memory. I say, place your hand on the area in your body where these emotions stem from. So they place their hand on it. I say, what color is it? They pull up the color. I say, what is the picture that's coming out from this color? Let that screen come up, because this is the very first time you felt these emotions. And then it's a little bit longer of a process, but then the memory comes to mind. So they're not consciously thinking about it. I'm saying it's in your body. They identify where it is. They bring that color up, and then they take me to the very first time they felt the emotion. That's how I find it.
Mhm.
So it's really not about, it's all the information is stored within the body.
Mhm.
And that's what I utilize.
Okay. Okay. No, that's fair. Thank you. Now, is there any, are there any changes when people go through becoming parents? So there could be a lot of stuff that comes up as you become a parent. So then how do
Yeah.
you identify that and work through that?
Yeah. Every time you go into a new position, like you become a husband or wife, new program sets in. You become a parent, new program sets in. You get a job, new program sets in. You get a new program each time. Each time a new piece of your identity comes on board. So most people don't have the extraordinary experience that I did where I just started wigging out, but I had deep childhood trauma wounds that I hadn't even started to deal with. And so, depending on how much you went through as a child and how much you hadn't healed or let go of, depends on how hard those new positions or identities are going to really, like, for some women, they become a mom and they're like, and it's like the job they've been waiting for, and they're great at it and wonderful. And it's like the best time of their lives. And I'd say that's more women than what happened to me, which I love being a mom, but I didn't realize all the triggers that were going to come with it at the same time. So
Mhm.
it's not a one size fits all with that one in particular, but you do get a new program. That's why I said, typically we turn into one of our parents, and
Yeah.
then we attract the opposite one. So it's just about becoming aware of those patterns, and having enough awareness to be like, oh, I'm grabbing a hold of those parts of my dad that were abusive,
Mhm.
that were hurtful, that were painful, and that I don't want.
Yeah.
It's about being aware of that. And because your subconscious is so very strong, your programming is so very strong, that if you have done no inner work, trust and believe that the program that comes in is not going to be one that you're probably going to love.
Yeah, absolutely. And where does like postpartum then come into like postpartum depression? That can obviously cause a lot more chaos for women. How do they navigate that? And then again, things can then get jumbled up and you don't know what's going on. So how do women navigate that piece?
Oh gosh. I had a really bad postpartum with my second daughter. I believe that postpartum depression comes when you've had a history of depression most of the time,
Mm.
which I definitely did. You know, growing up with a super traumatic childhood, and then my dad dying when I was 11, I went through so many really low points that when I had my second daughter, definitely the hormones are at play, right? You have these crazy drop in hormones, but also all the unhealed trauma, I think, has a massive to do with it, because that's where I'd never been that significantly suicidal. I was just not right. I was not there.
Mm.
And I will tell you that for most women like me, I didn't know that I was in it when I was in it. I just was not right. I had no idea how bad I was. And I remember, what did it really take? Oh, it took my mom sitting me down and asking me, Tam, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, why? I was like, what are you talking about? I had no idea when I was in it, which is weird to even say now, because my husband, he had to hide all the guns. He was in law enforcement. He had to hide all the guns. He was really scared when he went to work at night,
Mm.
because I just wasn't right, and I didn't see it at all. So I think for that, it really takes someone outside of her to really say, "Hey, how are you?" And I think you'll see signs of it during the pregnancy. Like me, I was depressed in my first two pregnancies. So that's a really big indicator that you're prone to some bad postpartum
Mm.
depression.
Yeah.
But I think it's just the awareness of your loved ones. Like I have a really passive husband, and I wondered afterwards why he didn't sat me down and say, we need to get you some help.
Mm.
Because there were some moments where it was very obvious
Mhm.
and he just didn't want to say anything. But it took my mom coming forward and being like, you're not okay. I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think it would be harder for a woman to receive it from her husband? I'm curious, like maybe.
Probably, but it's necessary. If he's the only one, he could go get some allies, get her loved ones. Ideally, I think I'm a great masker. And so I don't think I let everyone see it. But the two people closest to me, my mom and my husband, probably everyone saw it, just not to the extent that the two of them did. But go get some allies, the people that are closest to her, if you feel like she will take it personally from you. But at the same time, me looking back, it was like I was such a mess. Maybe I wouldn't receive it well initially.
Mhm.
But if you're really concerned, does that matter how they receive it?
Right.
They're fixing to, I was really suicidal. So at that point, it's worth distressing her to be like, there's something going on here.
Yeah, for sure. And you talked about your personal journey with trauma and all the healing work you've done, but you also mentioned that your father passed away when you were still young,
Mhm.
and a lot of the trauma came from there. So, how does that change the healing process? Because I see a lot of people, they're able to, at least what I've observed, the healing is somewhat expedited in the way where if you could sit that person down and talk about it, especially if the other person's open to having that discussion, that can really help with the healing process. But if that person is no longer here or is someone that you can't trust with your emotions to talk to them, or you just don't want to talk to them and you want to just do the healing for yourself because ultimately that's what it is, right? It is for yourself. How were you able to navigate it in that way, knowing your father was no longer here?
Oh, it was much easier to forgive him from the grave in a lot of ways, not all ways, but in a lot of ways for reasons like you said. If they're an unreasonable person or they're not willing to accept any responsibility, then that could be difficult conversation to have. With my clients, oftentimes I'll have them write a letter
Yeah.
to alleviate some of it, but you have to remember that all forgiveness is self-forgiveness.
Mm.
It really doesn't have anything to do with that other person. And forgiveness can be done no matter where the other person's at. It's essentially breaking off the contract you had with them, saying, yeah, null and void on this contract. I'm just breaking up with all of it. It's not even about saying that what they did was it was right, acceptable, okay. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with letting go of the negative emotions attached to the event and
Mhm.
attached to them. And so for me, it's been a lot easier for me to connect with my dad now that he is not in human form, because his energy is different now. I don't know how people feel about this, but he doesn't have the intense personality he did in human form, that controlling. My dad was not okay with me being anything other than what he said I could be. He really wanted that full control and was very specific. The list of things I couldn't do was very long,
Mhm.
and I had to be exactly who he wanted, or else I was confronted with physical pain. And so for me, it was much easier to forgive him, having to work that relationship out in the physical,
Yeah. Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And I think not to undermine the pain, but I feel like a lot of the times when you objectively look at that individual and you have compassion for them, you can sometimes be able to accept the fact that they were also dealing with something and they probably didn't have the full awareness or understanding of what they were doing. Now, that again doesn't dismiss how their actions made you feel, but it does help with that
Oh,
healing
yeah.
journey for yourself and the acceptance and forgiveness, because then you can see them as the little child inside of them. that will
Mhm.
out, right?
Absolutely, and that is what I did.
Mhm,
Once you can neutralize your own trauma, you get to take from that scenario the wisdom.
mhm,
So, for my dad, I now see that my dad was desperately trying to protect me.
mm,
He went through this horrible, wretched life himself.
yeah,
Wretched, horrible things that happened to him. My life is just a fraction of what he went through, but I couldn't see his pain until I dealt with mine.
mhm,
So once I healed my own pain, then I could go back to his. So I've gone back to his childhood because his DNA lives within me. Him and I, there's no separation. He is me.
mhm,
So I go back through my DNA and I'm now healing his
mhm,
childhood. He's gone. That human being that he was is not in the physical anymore, but I'm clearing the lineage
mhm,
for my kids
right,
because we have to understand that epigenetics tells us that all the trauma and pain and beliefs that you didn't heal get dropped off on your kid's doorstep. So his pain became my pain on the moment of conception. And so that means I have the opportunity and the great pleasure of healing his stuff too.
right.
That's
Yeah,
what I do.
and that, again, I think does bring about a lot of agency when you're able to look at it that I can bring this generational trauma to an end. It can end with me, and whatever happened doesn't need to happen again, right? To generations that will come after me. Now, the other piece, and again, without undermining the experience that it has on people, but you touched on this earlier too, our relationships, especially our romantic relationships, are meant to enable our growth and we can grow from them. But I feel like a lot of our relationships, whether it's our parents, our partners, our children, they're all meant to be teachers to help us on this journey. And it sounds like the relationship you had with your dad, as tough as it was, has played that role of being a teacher
Mhm.
in your life. And you've been able to draw so much meaning from it and take so much from it for your own self now that it's allowing you to show up as a different person in your family.
Yeah. It is my greatest teacher. Yeah, once we heal our trauma, we can look back. Maybe not everyone feels this way, but I can now look back and be like, I'm so thankful for it.
Mhm,
I'm so thankful for all of it. And even more, I believe that I chose it.
mm,
I believe that before I came here, I chose to go through these specific traumas in order to come to the place where I'm at now. How could I stand in the place, this neutral place, and hold people's hands through their emotional baggage if I hadn't been through hell and back? I couldn't.
mhm,
And so I am so thankful for all of it.
mhm.
And yes, it is my greatest teacher, but beyond that, I'm so grateful for it. Like, how could I not love something that brought me this, not only this sort of healing, like if we had this life that was no super highs, no super lows, just flatlining, it's what is that? What does that do? I
Yeah,
don't know that I'd sign up for that. I want to go way up and I want to crash way down. Like when we go on a roller coaster, would we really get on if it just went
yeah,
that's a car, right?
yeah.
So I believe for me, I believe that I chose all of it. I
Mm,
chose my father, I chose my mother, I chose this, everything.
mhm,
And in that way, it gives me complete ownership and responsibility of my life and say, if I did choose that, what would be the purpose?
mhm.
What would be the purpose of me choosing that life?
Right. Yeah.
So if everyone did that, and of course, it does take a good amount of healing before you can get there. I get that. But if we all got there and said, oh, that makes so much sense because I am living my purpose. This shit lights me up. I could talk about this shit all day.
Yeah.
I could, like this is my absolute passion and pleasure. And so it all makes sense to me now.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think talking about that passion and what I can relate to is having this experience. And I do want to pose that question to you, like knowing what you know now and going through this journey of healing, how does that set you up for the work you're doing with other people?
It's all of it.
Mhm.
Could you just imagine someone trying to teach you? It's like going to, this is how it's like. You go to business school and your professor has never owned a business.
Mhm.
That's what our college situation looks like. But it's like, what? No, you go through something and then you teach someone else how to go through that thing. I tell my clients this every time I take you through one of your, every time I do a session with you, I'm healing another piece of myself and another piece of myself and another piece of myself. I'm constantly healing.
Yeah.
And I believe that's why I chose this, because with every client, with every session, I am receiving more and more healing, right? So until we have had those sort of breakthroughs, I think that's what and almost all of my clients do that. As soon as they go through my program, they're like, "Oh no, I want to do this too." Because it's like when you understand that you have the ability to have this level of peace inside of you, regardless of your circumstances, shit could be just like burning to the ground around you, and you have this like tremendous peace within. You want to give that to everyone,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's just it's like a full-on addiction. Once you get yourself right inside, you want to freaking light the world up with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And speaking of sessions, I am very curious to hear more about your podcast because that's very cool. So, are you able to share
Yeah.
the whole concept behind your podcast and doing these sessions?
Yeah. So my podcast isn't the normal podcast because it, instead of interviewing an expert, someone who's come out on the other side, like you are, I bring on women, a couple of men actually too, who want to find the reason for their pattern relationship, their relationship pattern.
Mm.
And so they come on, it's called an what? Totally blanked. Behind the Veil
Mm.
Anonymous Transformations. Gosh, I got that way backwards. And essentially, these women, couple men, they come on anonymously. They're completely, their screen has a silhouette over it. You can see me, you can hear them, but you can't see them. And this allows them to completely open up. So I take them through a session. And these are not like your normal sessions. These are very deep sessions. Like we go all the way down. So I put them in a very relaxed state. I have them really map out their patterns, their toxic patterns, and we go back to their childhood a lot of times. And they take me through an event. We neutralize an event that they had in early childhood. We find the belief and they get this massive transformation. So it's a very cool concept. And in fact, I'm always looking for new people to come on. So getting the word out
Yeah,
here and now.
there you go. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So, if anyone's interested to reach out to you,
Yeah.
which may be a good time to talk about that because I've really enjoyed our conversation. I love the concept of your show and everything you've shared really resonated with me, and I'm able to relate to so much of it. So I appreciate all of that. But for listeners that do want to learn more about your work or find you or even volunteer for the podcast, what are some ways they can do that?
So do you have my link tree? I could provide you with my link tree.
Yeah.
And on there, it has the application to apply to be on the podcast. The reason why I love to have podcast listeners on my podcast is because you're more open, right? Your listeners are more open. They're searching, they're seeking. They might just be dipping their toes in the water or they might be doing some treatments themselves. But either way, you're on your healing journey. If you're drawn to this podcast, you're on your healing journey somewhere in the process. Because of the process I do is pretty deep and intense. I love when people are just open. So I have my link tree with the application, but also if you weren't interested in being on the podcast and you just wanted to reach out to me, you could also book a discovery call with me. And there's all my platforms are on there too. I'm very active on Instagram. So if you had like a question, a lot of people hit me up with relationship questions. You could do that on there or you could email me.
Okay, we'll definitely share the link tree in the show notes so people can find it and put everything else in there as well. But Tammy, thank you so much for your time today. It was great. It was a pleasure having you on, and I enjoyed this conversation so much. So thank you again.
So wonderful. Thank you for having me. And thank you for those like deep and beautiful, profound questions, because that's what makes such a juicy conversation is
Yeah.
let's
Well,
go, let's get deep.
yeah. No, I
Let's
appreciate your
get deep with
vulnerability. So
this.
thank you.
Yeah.